Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we're going to play around with a variable that is a little hard to quantify. The amount of water that I have in my damp yarn when I go to speckle on it for countertop speckles. Now, this is a variable that I have looked at in the past, where I speckled onto some yarn where I squeezed out almost all the water from the pre-soak, and then some yarn where I left a lot more water in it. But today I thought that we'd make things even more extreme, just to see how much this variable that intuitively I know should make a difference will make on our yarn. There are so many different variables when it comes to dyeing yarn. And if you want to be able to accurately anticipate what is going to happen with your colors and your techniques, well, then let's talk about today's sponsor. This portion of today's video is sponsored by Alanna Wilcox's Color Alchemy Masterclass, a course that will take you beyond just dyeing yarn. Alanna will teach you how to truly understand color. If you've ever felt stuck trying to guess how to get just the right shade, or frustrated when your color results don't match what you had in mind, the Color Alchemy Masterclass can help you take control of your color outcomes. Registration for the Winter 2025-26 session is now open. The Masterclass kicks off with a live orientation in November, followed by on-demand lessons that help you build a strong foundation in the science of color and art of dyeing. Then in January and February, you'll join 4 live Zoom sessions that cover how to go from an inspiration photo to a color palette, how to create precise dye formulas with confidence, how to keep your notes organized so that way you can actually accurately repeat your results, and finally, how to troubleshoot your process so dyeing yarn and fiber feels exciting and fun and not stressful. Throughout the course, you'll get direct support through a private Discord community, and course participants get exclusive access to Alanna Wilcox's book, Color Alchemy from Digital to Dye, as part of the kit that she sends you as part of the course. One of the things that sets this Color Alchemy Masterclass apart is that it's not tied to any one brand of dye. Alanna, who I think is a color expert, will teach you how color works, and so then you can apply that to whatever project you're doing with whatever tools you have at your disposal. And so whether you are a hobby dyer wanting to create yarn for your own use, or an indie dyer who's starting a business, the Color Alchemy Masterclass can help you feel more confident, consistent, and creative. If you're not quite ready to jump into a full masterclass and want to make sure that Alanna's teaching style aligns with your learning style, Alanna has an on-demand workshop called Creating a Digital Dye Notebook that you can try first. And then if you decide to take the masterclass after, the fee from that workshop you can apply to your masterclass enrollment. I have not taken the Color Alchemy Masterclass myself, but I have reviewed the Digital Dye Notebook workshop and found Alanna's teaching style approachable and really helpful. Alanna's teaching style makes learning fun, clear, and totally empowering. Registration for the winter session of the Color Alchemy class closes November 17th, 2025, and spots are limited. You can find more information, reviews, and stunning student results at her website, alannawilcox.com. I'll have it linked down below at the top of the video description. Alanna Wilcox, thank you again for sponsoring this portion of today's video. I am making a couple changes from the last time I compared the amount of water that I left in my yarn before doing countertop speckles. The last time I did this, I speckled with dyes that were mixed with citric acid powder. And that allows you to get both smaller speckles, allows you to spread the dye out more, but it also allows the dyes to strike to your yarn faster. So today, I'm gonna use straight dye powder because the amount the colors are gonna spread, I think will have a more dramatic difference between our just barely damp yarn and our much more saturated yarn that is very wet but not quite low immersion. But that's the thing with experiments. Maybe we'll see a huge difference, maybe we won't. But let's go look at our colors. For our color palette today, I have pulled 5 different DHarma acid dyes. I've pulled Golden Poppy, Persimmon, Lilac, Delphinium Blue, and Aubergine / Eggplant. And I love the way that these colors work together. I actually filmed a video recently using these 4 Maybe that has just come out on the channel, but I'm excited to play around with it. Now, I know from experience that delphinium blue and lilac both break with speckles, so we'll have some pink and blue speckles in there from those. But because we're using the straight dye powder, I expect that we'll get some level of the pre-mixed color out there as well. Now, one of the things that's gonna make today's project different from what I did a few years ago is that I plan to speckle with straight dye powder. These are gonna give us some, yes, super fine speckles, but also some more spread, some more splotch. And I think that because there could be, in theory, more dye in any given little area that I apply dye to, we could see some more differences between our damp yarn versus our wet yarn, but also maybe not. So we'll just have to see how much of a difference this variable that normally I don't pay a lot of attention to can make on our colorway. The other difference between the last time I tried this and today is our yarn. Today we are going to be dyeing Knit Picks Swish DK yarn. This yarn is 100% superwash merino wool. It speckles very well, but since it's a DK weight yarn versus a fingering weight sock yarn, there's a little less surface area because we have less yardage. And so we can get more coverage on the yarn with our speckles without having to do as many passes as what we may have done in the past. So hopefully this will mean I have to move the yarn around on the counter a little bit less, but we'll see, because ultimately my goal is to create pretty yarn. I'm just playing around with a variable. I have pre-soaked this yarn for a couple of hours in plain tap water, but I am going to want to add acid to our yarn so that way the colors will bind. Without acid, the colors won't strike well. So I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4.5 tablespoons of white vinegar into this basin. That exact proportion is not that important, especially because I don't know the water volume I have. Now, in theory, adding your acid directly onto your yarn or fabric can cause, if you're doing kettle dyeing, can cause some more dye to strike in one area. But since we're doing a technique where the dyes aren't really going to have a huge opportunity to spread out, I mean, they can spread through the fibers, but we're not kettle dyeing this. It shouldn't make a huge difference. And even if I were kettle dyeing, this is something I do all the time. And part of the beauty of hand-dyed yarn are some of those like variations and quote imperfections. If the yarn is too perfect, then it's not exciting. I may as well have bought commercial yarn. And so I guess we're now ready to go. I'll see you back at the counter. I was thinking a lot about how I wanted to do this without accidentally like spilling dye on my floor and keeping the yarn really saturated. Like, I'm removing this yarn, it is still dripping. Okay, this is probably as wet as I could possibly have it. Like, there is water that is going to be leaking out of this. Flipping this without, I guess, more color leaking out is something that would be extremely challenging. We will still try. You know, we might need to flip in micro sections, but I wanted to bring extremes in as much as I could. Now, for these other two skeins, I could pop them through my spin dryer and really remove a lot of the water. I want there to be some water. I'm gonna squeeze out as much as I can without being like too harsh on the yarn. We do need some water in here for the dyes to strike. So this is probably closer to where I might usually bring things. This is an extreme. But I actually, before I finish spreading our damp yarn out, I need one more skein of yarn. This final skein of yarn is our yarn mop. As I'm speckling with the dye powders directly from the dye containers, I will have pigment that's on my gloves. And I could just rinse that off, but we can also use that to create a beautiful bonus colorway that sometimes can end up being similar to one of our speckled ones. Other times we get more coverage. It depends on the pigments. This doesn't need to pre-soak long. I just put it in the water with vinegar, and then I'll have it off to the side, barely on camera, for us to use. Now, as for these two skeins, I'm going to bring this in. This is a little bit easier for me to spread out. The spread is not going to be identical to what I have on our more saturated yarn, but it is what it is. I'd say this is probably a little bit drier than I might usually have, and this is definitely wetter than I would usually have. I don't want to confuse this setup for immersion speckles because this yarn is just very wet. And so now I need to go put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves so we can start applying our dye powder onto our yarn. We are going to start with our aubergine. And I think I'm going to try to do our color placement in the same kind of way. So I'm taking a small pinch of the dye and then rubbing my fingers together to spread it onto our yarn. And I'm going to do this, whoop, that was a little more than I wanted. I'm going to do this twice for this color. And it doesn't really matter how much I do. Whoop, added a little bit much there. As long as I'm consistent, then that can give us a comparison. But it's hard when you have something that is unmeasured. Now, one of the main things I want to make sure I'm doing is I want to make sure that my gloves are dry between when I go in for different colors. And we'll probably mix up the placement of dye when we go in, when we flip to go in to add more color. And I will say that having the yarn scrunched in the pan helps keep the colors like a little bit more randomly placed. Now, right now, I can already see our aubergine dye spreading out more on our yarn with more water. I have a feeling a lot of it could just be sitting on the surface, barely dissolved on this yarn. But again, we will see. I'm going to not put things in the exact same order on the second side as where I've put them on this first side. But I'm just going to try to be as consistent as possible between the two. Gosh. And I'm trying very hard to add the same amount of dye. I will say that I can get a remarkable amount of consistency when I do speckled projects at home. I mean, I'm in my home. And I think that some of that comes from just years of experience. The colors will blend and mix more once I start to get a little bit more random with them. So for example, with the delphinium blue, and I'm trying to pay attention to that edge, I'm coming in, and the goal is to sprinkle the dye on a little bit like you might salt on something. You don't want to just release your clump of dye in any one spot. Okay, so this is the delphinium blue. I'm not going all the way across. I'm just doing a little bit down on that end. I mean, the goal is just to have some amount of consistency between the two. And you can see these colors are sinking in for sure. I'm gonna have to take a closer look here in a moment. There's a lot of powder that's just sitting on the surface. Some is sinking in. It's just possible it might take a little longer. But it's completely okay to have different colors in different areas. Kind of just making this up as we go along. But if I was doing the colors more all over and with diagonals or something, it would be harder. We'll just go up at this top. It would be harder for me to control and to try to treat things as similar as I am. But again, things will get more blended once we go to the other side. And it doesn't matter that I only did golden poppy once. I can choose to do that twice or 3 times on the other side. I will say there's a lot less yarn going on, or a lot less dye going on the yarn mop than what I expected. Let's zoom in on the various sides. Here we have some of the first dye I added and some of the last. And so you can see that this first color, the aubergine, is very much sinking into the yarn, whereas our lilac or delphinium blue, I don't know which one it was, hasn't really sunk in as much yet. It's going to need a little bit of time. If we look at a similar spot on our very wet yarn, we see something quite different. We see that our aubergine has definitely sunk in. We see a lot of breaking with our, I'm thinking that was delphinium blue, could have been our lilac, but I'm seeing a lot of like pink speckles with a little more blue spread over there. And again, here's our wetter yarn, a different section, compared to what we're seeing over on our drier yarn. Now, looking in, it's hard for me to say how wet things are. I do feel like we still have some powder on the surface, but the colors are also starting to sink into the fibers. I realized I did not label the zip ties at all. I think these two both have an E or an F on them, and I am going to quickly add an A to our mostly, that is a very bad A, an A to our mostly dry yarn, or less wet yarn. This way, editing Rebecca can hopefully tell the difference between the two. But now I'm going to go ahead and set a timer for 10 minutes just to see if we get any change and if these things are going to look a little bit closer together. And while we wait, I'm going to try to not move the camera so that way when we come back, we can see how similar or different things are looking. I don't think things look that different. I will say, I expect when I move this, there will be more color spread that happens in both cases, but okay, we'll see. We gotta flip the yarn. Let's do the easier ones first. So I'm picking it up, gently placing it back down. We're gonna pick it up, place it back down, and then we are going to spread things out so that way we can apply more, and hopefully it'll go through a few layers of yarn. Okay, over here, I'm a lot more nervous to flip because I feel like as I go in, we're going to be sort of scrunching and moving things around more. You know, it is what it is. Maybe a lot of these colors had time to strike to the yarn already where they were, so maybe we're not going to see a lot of things moving around. That is hard to say. But we're going to carry on and add color to the other side, even though we already see a lot more color here than we do over there. I intended to add the colors in different areas than I had the first time. However, on our very wet yarn, it was really easy to see where the other colors had been placed. And so I decided to stick with the relative placement as best I could. Maybe I mixed up some of the delphinium blue and the lilac, but that's all okay. It's okay if the colors layer on top of each other or go a little bit of a different way. I just followed approximately the same progression. And when we eventually go and steam set this yarn to heat set everything, the yarn is going to be touching itself in various points, so we'll end up with color transfer just from that. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. Once I finished adding the dye, I set a timer for 10 minutes, so that way we could try to give the dyes time to sink into the yarn. But once again, to the best of my ability, I attempted to use the exact same amount of dye in each sample. They're just looking very, very different because of the amount of water in there. And I'm seeing a lot more spread of the color on our wet yarn. Of course, once we go steam set, that is going to introduce liquid and moisture into our drier yarn, and so I expect we will see colors that are more dramatic as that dye sinks in, but we might just need the steam to do that. So it's possible we could end up with things that look very similar in the end. I just might not know what our speckles are going to look like until we steam set it, and so this stage is super interesting to me. Well, you can see we still have a difference here that feels very much the same from what we have seen. So now I want to go and start steam setting the yarn. I'm going to pick this up and sort of carefully add it into my steamer basket. And then I'm going to carefully take this to the stove and put it in a steamer basket for 30 minutes. And I'm expecting to see a bit of a glow up there. Now, at the same time, I'm going to do the exact same thing with this yarn, but you can see just the weight of the yarn is making things spill out. So I'm actually going to carry this bin over to the stove with me. Pop a lid on, and we're going to start steam setting that for 30 minutes as well. Now, as for our yarn mop, we are going to use her to clean up. We have dye left on our counter. Yes, this is going to muddy things a bit, but why leave any dye behind? And I'm curious what all these colors would combine to. Now, I will also be cleaning the counter with like an actual paper towel. There is potentially some staining that'll happen. This is a shower curtain that I use over and over again for my dyeing projects. And then over here, we are also going to wipe up as much of this excess color as we can. And now we have a very fall themed yarn mop that I am going to set aside until a steamer basket opens up and we can steam set this. And in the meantime, I'm going to clean up my kitchen. This is our dryer yarn, and I regret that I didn't show what it looked like because we're very steamy right when I put it in. Things are definitely more like pigmented. I see a lot more color. I am shifting the yarn and I'm putting it back in here for just 5 more minutes because I noticed that on the surface there may have been like a little bit of dye. I didn't touch it to see, but that was like 10 minutes ago when I peeked. So I'm going to give this just 5 more minutes before we remove it. But our other yarn, we can go ahead and remove now. And the one thing that I can finally do is squeeze out some of that water. These colors spread so much more. It doesn't necessarily look speckled. It looks like it could have been a yarn mop. Oh my goodness. It's beautiful. It's just way more similar to this mop that I still have to steam set. And let's just check beneath. There's a hint of color below. I don't know if it shows up on camera, just a tiny bit of paint. Most of the color is in our yarn. That little bit of something else, like, makes sense because we had some of that, like, aubergine dye left in our pan before. But oh man, I expected the colors to spread more when we went and steamed it. I did not expect this one to look like this. Okay. The difference between the two is pretty striking. Because here, I have a colorway that still feels speckled. Yes, the color has spread, but you can see a lot of white and the patches of color are ultimately on the smaller side. The yarns are related. I'm not seeing any color down below. The yarns are related to one another, but definitely distinct. And so that is good. Okay, that was just a tiny bit of powder there. I always clean the steamer baskets, and this is the reason why. Sometimes there is some powder left on there. I was so nervous this wasn't going to work. Ah! Now I just need to wait for the yarn to cool completely so we can wash it. The last time I tried this demonstration, the results weren't dramatic, even though anecdotally I knew it made a difference. And I think that no matter what, when you add dry powder onto yarn and then go steam set it, things are going to continue to spread as it heats. But if you have less water in the yarn, it can't really travel as far, and so it's going to stay put a little bit more. Now, if you want to get even finer speckles, we got more splotched still on our speckled colorway. I recommend mixing the dyes with citric acid, so that way you also have acid that kind of dissolves in that little spot as well, and that helps the color kind of stick and stay put. Plus, it dilutes the powder, allows you to add even less powder in any given area, and so then you could spread the powder more, also allowing you to get tiny speckles. So for this technique, I recommend having a dampness somewhere in the middle. I would remove most of the water from your yarn, but have it so that way it's not dripping, but if you were to squeeze it, you could still squeeze out some more water. And certainly nowhere near as wet as the wet one. I would never ever have it that wet, but it was interesting as like a thought experiment. And over time, you'll get a sense and a feel of how things go. It's just harder to look back at a project and see, okay, those colors spread way more than I wanted them to. Why did that happen? And so that can be a hard thing to try to reconcile when the amount of water left in the yarn is not something, I mean, I film all my projects, so I can't tell how much water was in the yarn when I went to speckle on it, unless I specifically was talking about that. And so yeah, it's just another variable to consider. Short of weighing the yarn before we put it on the counter, I'm not sure how easy it would be to accurately have the exact same amount of water in your yarn, but over time it's something you get a feel for. And normally I will squeeze out the yarn until a point where it's not gonna drip, but I know I could squeeze more water out, and that's typically where I go. But now let's go wash our yarn. We're gonna wash our low volume, low water yarn first, just because there's more likely to be dye here that did not dissolve. And as I add a little bit of some dish soap, what I mean by dye that didn't dissolve is that we could have dye that is on the surface from when I speckled that just is still on the surface because there wasn't enough water for it to dissolve. And so I see like a hair of color coming out now. That is not something that I would immediately be concerned about, but oh, look at that. I am so happy with how vibrant these colors are feeling. I think the only color of the ones I used that did not feel as similar to it when I dyed it in a tonal as maybe the lilac. But things are always deeper when you speckle than they are when you use them in another purpose. And that bleeding that we saw has completely resolved. So now I'm going to finish rinsing out the soap here, and I'm going to add this yarn to my spin dryer to remove some of the liquid, and we're going to quickly wash the other yarn. I'm showing it on camera but going quicker. And then once I'm done with this, I will add this yarn to the spin dryer. I'll wash the yarn off camera, and we use the spin dryer to remove some of the liquid, and then I'll hang it up to dry. I love it when I go for a comparison and it actually makes a difference. But what is really incredible about having very little water in our countertop speckled yarn versus a lot of water is that I feel like this yarn looked like this before we went into the steamer basket. And so even though the dye was wet and it seemed to have sunk into the fibers, things still spread a lot as we went to start heat setting. Now, we still have some really good speckles, and the aubergine color definitely speckled pretty well. I would say our mustard and the persimmon both sort of spread out a little bit more. I'll come in and give you some close-ups of our wetter yarn and then some close-ups of the drier yarn speckles. The speckles are just more defined when we had less water. One other thing to note is that the aubergine looks almost brown when it's really concentrated. You get that purple color as it spreads out more. And so I don't know if it's like a heat thing or what, but I think this is some of our lilac. But it's definitely, there's nothing quite like this brown color over here. It definitely reads more purple. When I first started dyeing speckles on yarn, I was obsessed with trying to get them as tiny, as fine of a point, like the tip of a pencil or the tip of a pen as possible. And you can achieve that with dyes mixed with citric acid. I think my actual speckle preference is something more like this, where you get all those fun speckles, but then when it knits up, you're gonna get more of the colorful flecks that you can see from far away. When the speckles are ultra, ultra fine, you're not really gonna see that come through as you take a step back as much. I do feel like even though things are more blown out here from our yarn that was wetter, the number of stitches between each color is going to be pretty similar. And that's because we place things in pretty much the same place. Like if we compare these two delphinium blue sections, we've got bits of blue, you know, over this area, and maybe it's a little bigger over here, but it's similar. And so it's just a different version of the same technique. And our yarn mop today is an even more blended version of what we have with the other two colorways. I would like to thank Alanna Wilcox again for sponsoring a portion of today's video. Registration for the Winter 2025-26 session of the Color Alchemy Masterclass is now open through November 17th, 2025. And you can find more information at her website, alannawilcox.com. I'll have links down in the video description. Alanna, thank you again. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. And doing this whole process showed me that just because I've tried to do a comparison or something once upon a time, it doesn't mean it's not worth revisiting. Now, there's some that I may not do because I felt like the results were fairly conclusive, and sometimes the results are a little bit intuitive and obvious, but I still think that it is helpful to show, and especially what yarn looks like before you steam set it and then after you steam set it and how much those colors can move. So please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I post videos at least twice a week, and we have so much fun over here. Thank you so much for watching.